I'm just going to be honest with you real quick. There's a very simple reason why a lot of these modern online multiplayer competitive games just straight up do not appeal to me, uh, apart from, a couple which are kind of the older ones, especially the ones built on older engines. I'm talking about CSGO here. And the reason is very simple. Well, there's actually there's obviously a few reasons. I just one of the things is I find it really fucking annoying how all of these shooters now, you can't just be generic military guy shooting at generic military guy, right? Like you have to. My name's Sakurai, and I'm have a fucking tragic backstory and a wife and kids at home, except I'm actually gay, and yeah, I'm fighting for the honor of my fucking clan, and I have this whole backstory and this particular fucking character. No, you're not. You're not that person. You're me. You're no one. You're nothing. Like I find that shit fucking grinds my gears like nobody's business. But aside from that, and some other stuff like intrusive anti-cheats, one of the big things that the games are missing is jank. And I will now offer you the title of this video. Jank is depth. Look at Mario 64. Maybe the most well-understood video game of all time. Maybe the video game with the deepest, most well-understood mechanics of all time in the task community. You've got all of the different ways of obtaining hyperspeed, entering PUs, cloning, not to mention just like the normal tricks used in speedrunning, like BLJs. There's so many different. I can't name all the fucking glitches in Mario 64. There are so many, and they're all so interesting and understood in such depth, and all of them are unintended. All of them are unintended. Spawning displacement, blah 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 blah. Right? All of these are unintended, and this is what makes the game such a fun sandbox for people to play, as well as built on top of a foundation of incredibly solid mechanics. The movement in Mario 64 is the best movement in any 3D platformer ever, don't at me. Another example, obviously, is Melee. It has a bunch of good mechanics, like the base mechanics of Smash going from 64 all the way to Ultimate are solid, but then the jank of Melee adds so much extra depth that it's the only one anyone gives a shit about. And then, modern games like Overwatch or Valorant or PUBG or whatever don't have any of this stuff. They don't have any of the interesting depth. The only depth they have is playing the game exactly as the developers intended you to get good at it, right? Like, the only depth you can ever have in these games is, learning to flick better and aim better and com better and whatever. Take, for example, CSGO movement versus Valorant movement. So right away you might say that Valorant has much more movement options. A lot of these classes' abilities, particularly Raze, with the satchel charges, allows you movement options that you just straight up don't have in CSGO. You have this entire level of vertical movement and quick acceleration that you just don't have in CSGO. The problem is that the game has to be balanced, right? The game has to be balanced. So, you only have two satchels, and they're not that powerful. And even really good Raze players, I've seen this clip floating around recently of this guy, he satchel charges up to like a ledge, but then sees someone, and so he satchel charges away from the ledge and kills him. Now that's a pretty impressive shot. Like, it's impressive, but it's not that impressive. It's just two satchel charges. It can't, or satchels or whatever they're called. I've never played Valorant because it has it installs a rootkit on your computer. The options aren't there for actual play styles to develop. There's only one play style, and that's the way the developers intended the play style to happen. There's no you instead of having a wide variety of mechanics where you can see how you like to play and develop your own play style. There's 6 or whatever different classes you pick from, who each have their specified developer intended closed off playstyle that you have to learn. and there's no room for individuality or anything like that. Whereas in CS:GO, for example, there's no classes in CS:GO, but there really are classes in CS:GO. The most obvious one, the most obvious ones being you got like IGL, Entry Fragger, AWPer, Lurker, right? These aren't inbuilt classes. No one put these into the game on purpose. This is just how the meta has developed over time. And then on top of that, you have people who did, like, for example, Kenny S style aggressive AWP plays, or which Valve had to nerf because they're fucking idiots, or movement players, that's all of this stuff. There's a whole bunch of different ways to play CS:GO, and it's in terms of movement options or in terms of playstyle options. I would say that the CS:GO has more options than Valorant because a lot of this stuff is bugs. You got crouch bugs, edge bugs, surfing, b-hopping as the main sort of movement options in the game. None of those were developer intended, and yet because they weren't developer intended, it allows for a lot more freedom once you can pull them off. They're just difficult to pull off. But there's no rule saying only if you want to b-hop, you have to play in this particular playstyle. No, all the pros in CS:GO do a little b-hopping to get to places faster in certain situations, or they don't. Some people only care about b-hopping. Some people never do it. There's no class you have to pick or whatever. And I think Melee is a good example of the same sort of thing, right? I haven't played Melee really. I picked up the game. I loaded up a wave dash tutorial. I learned to wave dash. Then I closed the game and never played it again. Because that was all I was interested in. I just wanted to know how it felt to do a wave dash, and it felt pretty good. Again, obviously, although wave dashing is developer intended, so I can't use that as an example. But all the depth in Melee is just entirely comes from the community and people developing their individual playstyles, and not the stuff that was completely inserted by the devs. And I think TF2 is maybe even a better example of this than anything else, because TF2 has these classes. It was the game that invented having these like individualist characters. I don't know what I said, individualist. These individual characters with their personalities. The difference is that TF2's characters and personalities are basically just one-off jokes, right? No one takes them seriously. Plus, TF2 gives you Source Filmmaker, which gives you this entire, level for the community to make up their own stories with these characters, which just doesn't fucking exist. And, unless you're a TV show like Arcane, you can't just make a little fun. Anyway, there's no freedom anymore, man. Where's my goddamn freedom? But in TF2, you have all of these stuff like not just playing the game how each of the classes how it's intended, but you have these crazy subclasses like a Demo Knight or a Trolldier, which take it's hard to even know how intended they are from the developers, because the developers just throw all these items out into the community as sort of a sandbox and then let the community figure out which ones work better or not. And some of these combinations are probably intended and some of them probably aren't. And whether or not they're balanced comes down not to game design but to the skill of the community, right? Like depending on the map, for example, certain characters or playstyles like Trolldier might be overpowered, but then it's just a matter of learning to counter them. Each of these things has a counter, not because it was put there by the developer on purpose, but because the game is such a sandbox that there's always options. And that's the thing that games are missing now. A lot of these like modern competitive games just don't have they don't have options. You play the game exactly as intended or not at all. Even CS:GO compared to the previous games in Counter-Strike, in the Counter-Strike series, is completely locked off. Everyone only plays 5v5 competitive. Back in 1.6 in Source, it wasn't like that at all. You could play any game mode you wanted. There was, on unofficial servers was the way most people played the game. And of course, CS:GO is still miles ahead of all these other games because it still offers community servers. Most of these games don't even fucking offer community servers. CS:GO has the best maps of any multiplayer shooter. by far, by like far and away, no other game in existence has as good competitive maps as CS:GO, because they're community sourced. Because since the 90s, people have been refining these maps, and the community has been creating probably hundreds and hundreds of maps, and then playing them and figuring out which ones are good, and those make it into the games, and they're still doing it, and Valve supports it. None of this shit exists in modern games, and it makes me not want to fucking play them, because they get boring super quick. They get so boring so quickly. You look at Demo Night, like gameplay from like that one guy on YouTube. I forgot what his name is. He always says Demo Night, and you see him like trimping around the map. No, Valve didn't intend anyone to play like that. Obviously, Valve didn't intend to play anyone to play like that. But it's fun. So they don't come and take away your fun because it's anti-competitive or whatever, right? It actually allows itself to be a fucking game. It's not a fucking war. It's not a fucking battle for the control of a nation. It's a video game. It's meant to be fun, and so they have things you can do in it that are fun, and people find different things fun. I might want to surf for 2,000 hours in Counter-Strike. I can fucking do that. I can't do that in any other game. I might want to have some ridiculous playstyle, and like I don't know that much about Melee. Again, as I said, I'm not in the scene. I haven't really played it, but I know like Hungrybox plays Melee. I've seen the Emp Lemon video about how Hungrybox plays with a sort of like slow, floaty character, which is antithetical to how most people see Melee, and yet he's one of the best Melee players in the world. This is what video games don't have anymore. These online games, that you're just locked into playing it exactly how the devs intended, and they can be great devs. Like I'm not saying anything about the skill of these devs or anything. What I'm saying is, no skill on the part of the developer is going to match the collective like level of knowledge from an entire community. It's just not going to happen. And that's why jank is depth, because a lot of these games, there's only a certain way to play them. There's only a certain level of good you can get, or because there's only a certain way to play them. There's only a certain level of counter you have to learn, right? Like in CS:GO, there's a particular way to play each map, right? There's particular choke points, there's particular corners that you're going to be peeking, etc., etc. And so you learn which choke points you're going to have, right? Like let's say you learn there's a choke point at A long on Dust 2, right? So you want to put a guy or two guys there to look at the long doors and catch the T's when they're rushing. And then the T's know, well, because that's the meta, we flash and smoke that corner. And so then you have someone play anti-flash, or you have someone play an off-angle, and it becomes this mind game. But the difference is, let's take another map like Nuke, like if you look at, actually not even that, let's just go Dust 2 in Counter-Strike Source, and you look at Foon Too Much for Z-Block, right, and my guy fucking B-hops down middle, out fucking through mid doors, down CT, behind the enemy before they even get into B. No one's expecting that. No one knows how to counter it. But if you know how to, if you're expecting it, if that becomes something that people do, then it raises the skill ceiling of the game indefinitely, because there's so many more options, which means you have to get better at so many more things. And you can hyper fucking specialize in these games, and some people do. But in a lot of games, like even CS:GO is I'm singing its praises for the fact that it has the bare minimum of what should be expected, which is like some level of open-endedness and some level of community-supported jank. But I think like the ultimate test of this is Melee and TF2, and probably I don't know, Shrek Super Slam and Mario 64 and stuff. But as long as there's no market for this, like no one thinks there's no market for this. If any devs are out there thinking like, oh, I can't release a buggy game, look at how big of an industry speedrunning is, which is entirely based on this premise that bugs, glitches, and exploits increase the skill ceiling of a game and make it more competitive, make it even competitive at all. You know, these games, like most of the games that are popular speedruns, aren't competitive at all if they're hard. I mean, I guess Minecraft has PvP, but Mario 64, all the popular Mario speedruns, all of these popular speedruns have nothing competitive innately about them. But because of the depth of their gameplay, which is born from jank, you get this ability to master the game, and that breeds competitive creativity, which you just don't get in modern games. And yes, a lot of this was down to having rushed development cycle. It's kind of, you know, for every game like Melee that has glitches that make the game better, there's 100 games like Cyberpunk 2077 that have glitches that make the game worse. But I would rather have that. I would rather have once in a while a masterpiece accidentally performed than you know, some fucking shit show that's boring. I would rather have something interesting than something boring. You know, I'd rather have something fail in an interesting way. I would respect it more if it failed in an interesting way than if it was just boringly competent, which is how I see a lot of games these days. Just sort of neutered, fucking like bland, sterile. That's the word I'm looking for. Just these sterile games where it's like everything has to be super competitively viable, blah blah blah. Like even CS is like this. It's just that they've sort of quarantined off the interesting stuff into the community server browser. They used to quarantine off the interesting stuff into the silver ranks, but it doesn't exist anymore. Even silvers are too good. You know, the skill floors, because the game's been out for like over 10 years now, the skill floor is raised to the point where even silvers won't let you just b-hop on their heads and Zeus them from behind anymore. So, you know, all of the interesting stuff in the game just goes to the community servers, but at least it has the community servers. You know, none of these other games even have stuff like that. So, you know, you got to respect Valve a little bit for having some of the old school attitude, but even then, you know, this is the problem, is that these interesting games, which are the games that I brought up, fucking CSGO, TF2, and Melee, you know, CSGO at least has majors, but Valve, compared to like Dota, Valve doesn't give a shit about CSGO except for cases and skins. You know, people constantly complain about how little Valve care about CSGO, and you know, even people who complain about that are being little bitches, because look at fucking TF2, it's basically unplayable these days because of bots. And then Melee, of course, Nintendo are actively hostile about, right? Like at least people are allowed to still play TF2. Like even though the game, even though the game is bugged, is fucking broken because of all the botting issues and hasn't had an update in a million years. You know, meanwhile we have Melee where the developers are actively trying to stop people from playing it. And so, you know, it's just kind of a shitty situation, because this isn't what, I don't know. I don't know. There's no fix to this problem, because you can't purposefully make a game full of jank. And yeah, I think this is why we've seen both that Nickelodeon platform fighter and now this new platform fighter called like Multiverse or whatever. Both of these games are seeing a gap in the market where people like Melee and are fucking pissed off at Nintendo for not supporting it, and so they are trying to create a Melee clone that people will actually play, and then they'll support it and have an esport. The problem is none of them have. They're not quite as good as Melee. Nothing is quite as good as Melee because it's Melee, you know. And even if they were, it took decades for people to get the depth out of Melee that they did. You know, no one's going to give these games a chance for decades, I don't think, which is if they're just fighting an uphill battle. But I respect the effort to create a product to fill this gap. I mean, look at Skyrim. Like, Skyrim's one of the best-selling games of all time, and it's a buggy fucking mess that's borderline unplayable half the time. I don't know. I think social media has kind of done this, right, where people will complain too much on social media for game releases with a single fucking bug. You get Donkey making a video clowning on it. Software has bugs. It's part of how software works. Just leave it be. Bugs increase the skill ceiling. This stuff is good for the game, as long as it's not intrusive as long as it's a bug that you won't activate on accident and it will ruin your game. Then keep it in the game. It will only make the game better. that's my takeaway here. If it's a bug that you can't accidentally trigger and then have a serious negative outcome from, right? Then there's never any reason to remove it from the game. No game's ever good. You probably have bugs that do, and those deserve your priority. But no one fucking cares anymore. They just want to make sure their game doesn't get dragged on social media for having a tiny fucking bug in it or something. But we need more jank. We need more jank. And when I make the world's greatest video game, it's going to be full of jank.